Okay, I think it started. Yes, so once again, thank you so much for being here with us, and we are so excited to hear about your stories and yeah, on Agent Orange also as your experiences with supporting the Vietnam veterans um as well. So Nam, do you want to start with
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And then, hi, Paul. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So, I guess, for the beginning, so I guess we should just all introduce ourselves to you, and would love to hear a little bit more from your side as well. So, my name is Nam Nguyen. I am Vietnamese American. So, I'm currently based here in Chicago. I work in the energy sectors for BP here in Chicago, and then this is my very first year engaging with the U.S. leadership. U.S. Vietnam Leadership Youth Cohort. And then, yeah, this has been a fantastic opportunity. And then, beside my corporate work, I do have a nonprofit organization in Vietnam to support children of Vietnam. And then, a lot of children and students that we support are actually descendants of the Vietnamese veterans who actually have been exposed to Agent Orange. So, that is also one of the reasons why I participate in this project, and then really passionate about the topic, and would love to.
Hang on. Wait a minute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can I
yes.
hear you?
Yeah.
Hang on. Something's not right. Let me see. Let's see what I got to do here. There we go. Does that work? Can I hear from somebody?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Oh, there we go. How's that? Can I hear you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Can
Okay,
you
I can
hear?
hear you again. Now,
Okay,
suddenly, I've got a separate set of speakers, and sometimes in Zoom meetings, they just go out on me. So
awesome.
I'm just using my laptop speaker, which is not as strong, but it'll do. All right. Hi. So you were saying you have a nonprofit in Vietnam.
Yeah.
What's the name
So
of your nonprofit?
yes, it's like called a Back Wish Fund. So it's named after my son. So I recently welcomed my newborn sons, and then I just create a nonprofit organization that named after him
Mhm.
to support other childrens and students in Vietnam. And yeah, so we have support over like 200 children now, and then several of those are actually descendants of the Agent Orange victim. So I was just about to say that is like the reason why I'm just really passionate about this project and this topic. So thank you so much for being here today. And after that, I'll just pass it over to Lake. I guess if you can just quickly introduce yourself, where you are, and then why you decide to involve in this project, that would be great.
All right, fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. I must admit that I'm a very recent addition to this group. This group has done fantastic work. I was actually only added a few days ago. However, uh, happy to be here, happy to contribute to the conversation. I am not Vietnamese. However, I have been studying Northeast Asia and have recently got into studying Southeast Asia as well. So this has been an excellent education opportunity for me. Sitting back and listening to these stories, to these experiences, learning a little bit more, and overall just having this opportunity to talk to people who have had these experiences and excuse me. Uh, but yes, to round it out, just to have these experiences and to be a listener and to contribute in any way possible.
Yes. And my name is Van. I'm a graduate student at University of Washington in Seattle. I'm currently taking a gap year, and that's why I'm here to be a part of the U.S. Vietnam Youth Leadership Cohort, and super excited to be like a part of this Unseen Scars project. And we want as sorry, as like and Nam already mentioned, we're really excited to be like kind of like the bridge between Vietnamese and American youth, and just try our best to support on the efforts from both governments in like mitigating the impacts of the Vietnam War.
So, Van, I would guess that you were born in Vietnam with your
Oh,
accent.
yes. I'm 100% Vietnamese. I was born in Vietnam, born and raised in Vietnam for 18 years, and then I came to United States in 2019 for my undergrad.
Stuck here during the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah.
My sympathies.
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit about myself. I'm a retired civil engineer. I live in Berkeley. I was a Vietnam veteran, and that sort of seems to have dominated my life, the Vietnam War, and I have worked for many years actually on Agent Orange issues, not so much on the veterans issues, but more on the effect of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Before I got involved about 2005, and much of the really heavy lifting in terms of Agent Orange and veterans happened before that. 1989 was the first big lawsuit. In 91, the Congress started paying attention. And so veterans who were exposed, U.S. veterans who were exposed, have a pretty good deal. I mean, I could go into great detail about what's right and what's wrong with that, but it's they're paying several $billions a year out in compensation and medical care for Vietnam veterans who were affected by the herbicides. And I'm assuming what you want to talk about primarily today is herbicides, the Agent Orange. Is that correct? And that's why you're contacting me, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So we can talk extensively about that. But I've been back to Vietnam starting in 2008. I had never gone back after the war. But in 2008, I was working on trying to get support for the Vietnamese lawsuit on Agent Orange, and after that, the lawsuit died. So we've been working on legislation on Agent Orange. And I realized that if I was going to talk intelligently about Agent Orange and its effect on the Vietnamese and Laotians and Cambodians, that I should get myself back to Vietnam and really, travel the country and look at it. So I went back the first time in 2008, and then I've been back in 10, 12, 18, 19, 22, 23, 24. So this will be my seventh trip back, and we leave in 2 weeks. So for a tour. So I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and the Agent Orange campaign is a project of Veterans for Peace, and we're really working towards trying to mitigate in a very small way the effects of the war, both in terms of Agent Orange and unexploded ordnance. But primarily for me, my focus, I came to this primarily focused on Agent Orange. Other people in VFP are focused on more than I am anyway on unexploded ordnance, those are the two big legacies of the war, and a great deal is happening now after many years of neglect. A great deal is happening in both realms at this point. So, what would you like to talk about?
Yeah. So just want to kickstart this, Paul. So before meeting with you, so we all came up with a list of questions. So we do have a bunch of questions that we would like to ask you. And then so basically, but before we start with that, I just want to double check and confirm with you that are you, if you don't mind sharing, are you exposed to the Agent Orange or not? Because it would just be the reason because we do have several questions about the symptoms and things like that. So we can just skip through those if that is not applied to you, and then we can just talk more about like the organization that you're involved with and then the advocacy work that you have been involved with.
I was exposed. I was an infantryman up on the DMZ for 18 months in what we call the I-Corps area. So I was exposed. However, I do not have, and I've had some medical issues, but I do not have any of the presumed diseases that are presumed to be caused by exposure to Agent Orange.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so thank you so much for that clarification. So I guess like the first question that I just would like to pose to you is like, from the any experience that you have been from the exposure with Agent Orange in the war and thing like that. Can you describe a little bit about like how that has affected your day-to-day life, at least at the beginning when you just discovered that?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh yeah, like how has Agent Orange exposure has affected your day-to-day life?
Oh, well, it it helped confirm for me my feeling of having been used and abused by the U.S. military, but that has many other aspects too of having sent me off to a war that should never have happened and those sorts of things. But since I don't have any of those Agent Orange related issues, I certainly have plenty of PTSD to go around, and that's for which the VA has been very kind to me, and as they have for many other veterans, and provided with some assistance on those issues, on those kinds of issues. But and I've known very, very many veterans who have suffered from their exposure to Agent Orange. And a number of my friends who are my age, right around my age, who were in Vietnam, are dead now because of various cancers and diseases that are likely resulting from their exposure to dioxin and the herbicides. So you all know the sort of the general story about Agent Orange, right? You how much of it was sprayed and where it was sprayed and those sorts of things. Okay, so I don't need to go through those details. I mean, if what about you, Lake? Is that have you read something about those sort of basic factoids about Agent Orange?
Yes, I've certainly read literature about Agent Orange and its
Okay.
effects on humans, and I've seen the famous photographs of, it having its effects on humans.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And for people my age, I mean, a lot of Vietnam veterans, a lot of Vietnamese who were exposed, but my age, they're sick or they're already dead from those exposures. But the ones that are really heartbreaking are the children. That's that mom and pop were exposed, and they were born with birth defects, or they were exposed many years afterwards. I mean, there's been substantial amount of contamination remaining in Vietnam. And so if you've seen those pictures and you've seen those videos, you got an idea of sort of the scope of it. And my 7 trips back, I've met with hundreds of very severely disabled, mostly young adults who, not mostly, I mean, there's a number of them are young adults who've never been out of bed, can't feed themselves, are just totally disabled. They're living in the back room of a 2-bedroom or I mean, a 2-room house up in the mountains, and they'll never leave their bed. And their parents are getting old and are stuck with having to take care of these totally 24/7 disabled people. And it drives families into tremendous poverty. Um, there are some government programs to it's kind of like equivalent of Social Security. They give them a stipend based on the level of disability that they have or how many people in the family are disabled, but really it's just enough money to stave off starvation. And a farming family, everybody works. Mom and pop are out planting the rice or tending the crops, and the older boy is sitting on the back of the water buffalo while the water buffalo grazes, and the younger kids are taking care of the chickens and ducks. But if you've got kids or an adult who are disabled, then that takes not only that person out of the equation, but also one of the other family members has to stay with them and take care of them. And it's all throughout Vietnam, in the areas that were sprayed, and also in North Vietnam for the children, for the people who were exposed, who went south during the war, and either are sick themselves or have had children born with severe birth defects. So even in the North, there's this kind of problem. So I think that's the real issue at this point. The I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Did you have other more specific questions? I can keep going.
Yes, so you described that you've been involved in quite a bit of advocacy or legal actions related to Agent Orange. So we're wondering if you can share that a little bit more about that experience. Like how did you start getting involved and yeah, the overall experience in that.
Well, in 2004, a group of 12 Vietnamese got together and formed the Vietnam Agent Orange Vietnamese Association of Victims of Agent Orange, VAVA, and sued the 38 chemical companies that made this poison and contaminated it. I mean, it's the dioxin is a contaminant, right? We all understand that, right? And it's not part of the Agent Orange. It was a contaminant that was introduced in the manufacturing. So they sued those companies for, selling a defective product. And that went through the courts, was ultimately thrown out for very weak reasons. And the Supreme Court refused to hear our appeal or their appeal. And so it died when the Supreme Court refused to hear the logic of the case. So that was VAVA did that, and we formed the Agent Orange campaign here in support of that lawsuit, and gathered up evidence and provided with some legal assistance, filed some amicus briefs, and generally paid attention to what was going on and tried to raise educate the American people about the nature of the lawsuit and the Agent Orange problems that caused the lawsuit. When that went down in flames in 2009, we switched our efforts to try to get legislation on the matter. And in 2011, we helped draft a bill that hasn't really gone anywhere. It's like a lot of bills that are really worthwhile, but boy, if you don't got money behind you, you don't push very far into Congress. And we haven't had that kind of push. But we've introduced it every 2 years, thanks to my congressperson, Barbara Lee, who's introduced it for us every 2 years since then, every new Congress. And it's essentially, it's evolved some, but it's essentially the same, and it has 5 elements in it. It has cleaning up the problems in the dioxin that's remaining in Vietnam, and the arsenic that was also part of Agent Blue, assisting the Vietnamese who are affected by it, both the adults and their children, and assisting the children of male veterans who have birth defects. So you may be aware, there's all these diseases that if I got it, as a Vietnam veteran, if I got this disease, I could get care for it. But if my children had been born with birth defects, they don't get anything, with one exception: if the kids have been born with spina bifida, which is it's an opening along the spinal column where it doesn't properly develop, and it can be minor to utterly debilitating kinds of. It's a whole range of things within the neural tube defects. However, if for the children of women Vietnam veterans, so female Vietnam veterans who served in Vietnam, their kids can be born or have, not having kids any longer, but if they had a child born with just this huge range of 20 or more birth defects, an open-ended list, then they are eligible for assistance from the VA. And pretty much everything from fused digits to encephalitis to any number of, basically it's an open-ended list. And now none of those women are having children any longer. They're old. But that is part of the law, is that the children of women vets get all kinds of things, but they don't consider that the children of male veterans could have the same kinds of problems simply because they weren't in utero with, the man contributed what he contributed, and then the rest of it is up to the woman. And so they didn't, they've never announced that. So the bill includes extending that list that apply to the children of female veterans to the children of male veterans too. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is assistance to the Vietnamese American community in the United States, because it makes sense. If the Vietnamese are greatly affected and U.S. veterans are affected, well, those Vietnamese who were in Vietnam during the war may also be affected by their exposures. And the last thing is to do some additional, there's some money needed for some additional research to really nail down the scientific basis for some of these claims of illnesses and birth defects. So it had those 5 elements in it, and it still does. And that's where that's gone. We also have brought to the United States a number of delegations of activists, in terms of Agent Orange activists from Vietnam, and Agent Orange victims. We've had victims testify in Congress, for example. So that's kind of what we've done. Did you have other questions?
Do you want to start with your question?
He's frozen.
Oh,
Yeah, it seemed like
No, you're not.
he's back.
1, 2, 3. All right, I turned on my audio. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay. So, yes, I wanted to ask, how do you feel the government and the international community as well has responded to the needs of Agent Orange victims?
How do I feel the governments have responded?
Yes.
Well, for many years, nothing, until well after normalization. So the U.S., after the war, the U.S. treated Vietnam like a pariah, and those were very difficult years in Vietnam, as you know, Van.
Yeah.
But in 1994, the U.S. normalized relations finally, thanks to a number of factors, where the heat around the loss of Vietnam had cooled down enough that we could think about trying to normalize relations. However, for many years after that, until after 2002 or so, the U.S. government, the so-called diplomats in the U.S. government, whenever they would sit down with the Vietnamese to talk about a variety of issues, were very clear. You bring up Agent Orange, we're walking. We'll just leave the room. We're not going to talk about it. It's just a communist propaganda. But finally, around 2002, sufficient political pressure and scientific development of these issues had developed that that the U.S. started at least discussing the questions of Agent Orange. And then there were some very interesting and important people in this country that took up the question. The Ford Foundation being the first and the biggest of them, and they really started to answer some serious questions about it, and paying for the kinds of research that needed to be done, both environmental studies that they paid for, many millions of dollars that they spent in Vietnam, and having an environmental research organization, really take samples and study for dioxin and locate where the real hotspots were. So, and then later the Aspen Institute and Senator Leahy, Patrick Leahy from Vermont, just did tremendous work. And then we were working all that during that time too, but we weren't nearly so effective because we had no money. At least, well, we had no money and weren't good organizers. How's that? But altogether, eventually it came to the United States started to take responsibility for the contamination that remains in Vietnam. Under the rubric of do no further harm, they started talking about remediation. And the study showed that there were as many as maybe 25 hotspots in Vietnam, but 3 of them were far bigger than the rest. And those were the 3 major air bases where this stuff was, where the spray missions happened. And the United States stepped up in about 2013 or so and started remediating the Da Nang airport, where there was where spray missions were, and I was at that site several times before they really got started on it. But they've completely cleaned it up, and it cost them about $150 million. They thought it was going to be about 75 million, and it cost at least twice that before it was all done. The second one, the base Phuket, which is kind of in central southern, in the central part of South Vietnam, that was much smaller. It's on the middle of a military base. It's not in the middle of a city like the Da Nang airport. And it was much smaller, so they were able to scrape it up and cap it, as it happens a lot with various kinds of contamination, and that's done. And Da Nang is done too. The third biggest hotspot, and it's far bigger than any of the others, is Bien Hoa, just outside of Ho Chi Minh City. And that contamination is much wider spread. It's spread throughout the city in ways that the Da Nang airport wasn't. It's a big deal. And finally, the State Department said, well, we don't have, the AID doesn't have the kind of money to fix this. So they got the DOD to step up, the American Department of Defense. They have pledged, about 3 years ago, they pledged $10 million a year. I'm sorry, $30 million a year for 10 years, or $300 million to begin the remediation. And it's going to take them 10 years easily. And some of the other countries have stepped in, like Japan, Poland, Ireland, I think South Korea, have all taken little bits of this, but mostly it's going to be up to the U.S. to remediate this stuff, and they will do it with a combination of thermal desorption, they call it. That's what they did in Da Nang. They basically put it in a big pile and heated it to 300 degrees for months until it no longer had any dioxin left in it, and it also burned off the remaining herbicides too. And they're going to do some of that in Bien Hoa. Some of it they're going to just scrape it up and put it in a contained landfill. So they're going to do a variety of different things depending on the area, because there's a number of areas around the Bien Hoa Air Base that are contaminated, and out through the streams out into the city, and that's a problem. Other countries have done a little, as I mentioned with Bien Hoa. I'm not familiar. Maybe things going on that I'm not familiar with, but I'm mostly focused on the U.S. In terms of unexploded ordnance, several other countries have been very, very helpful, such as Norwegian People's Aid and Irish Aid, and the Polish government. Why those 3, I don't know, but they have provided tremendous assistance over unexploded ordnance. But I don't have the same information about Agent Orange.
Got it. Thank you so much, Paul. So just want to clarify. So you say Da Nang, Bien Hoa, and what is the third one, the third hotspot?
Phuket. Phucat. Phuket.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Got it. Awesome. Thank you very much. My next question for you, Paul, is so I will actually looking into the timeline of justice, and then all of action has been taken. So I think it maybe like back in 1984, right? Like a group of U.S. veterans file like a class action lawsuits against the manufacturer of Agent Orange, as you previously mentioned. So I think that one result into a settlement of like $180 million towards like the veterans, the American veteran, but leaving the Vietnamese victim without compensation during that lawsuit. Obviously that will be for the normalizations of a relationship between Vietnam and the US. And then soon after that, 1991, that is when the Agent Orange Act was signed. But like I think like you mentioned VAVA. So VAVA in 2004 did file a lawsuit in the US court system seeking for justice for the Vietnamese victim. However, the court dismissed that case, stating that like the use of Agent Orange did not violate international law. Would I find that to be very interesting? I just don't know what is your opinions in it. And then also, since you mentioned like because like we don't have money and kind of thing like that, I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more about like the challenges that you face throughout the whole journey of advocating for the Agent Orange victim.
And excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt very quickly. Very sorry, but I do have to step out of the call very quickly. But Paul, thank you so much for your time. I'll likely be in contact. My two constituents are going to take it from here. Thank you all so much.
Okay, all right.
Thanks,
Lake. See ya.
Lake, nice to meet you. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. It sounds like you're pretty well read on this stuff already. So the things I've said I don't know if you sound like you've heard this before, a lot of this before. So in terms of the international law issues, from what I'm not a lawyer, but I play a lawyer on TV kind of thing. It's my understanding that the United States is able to skate on the question of breaking international law with the use of Agent Orange. And that is their excuse, their legal excuse, which seems to be legally getting them under the wire, is that it was not intended to hurt anybody. We didn't think it was dangerous. It was a tactical tool, just part of the art of war, and no different than a mortar round. And they apparently can get away with that. However, 10% of the total, there were 15 different herbicides and 60% of them were Agent Orange. So we kind of call them all Agent Orange, even though there were many others. And they were all similar except for Agent Blue, which was not 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T and the like. And it wasn't designed, all of those others were designed to kill leafy plants, to cause uncontrolled growth of the plant over a short period of time, and it would cause the leaves to fall off. And that's what killed the plants. In fact, those things are growth hormones if applied in tiny little amounts. But if you apply it in bigger amounts, it causes the plant to just grow so fast that the leaves fall off. And that kills the plant. Agent Blue, on the other hand, is based on cacodyllic acid, which is arsenic, and it's designed to kill grasses. Well, what would that be? Rice. And so it was an effort to deny the enemy access to food, and that was a war crime at the time. But nobody has the push to bring that to any kind of world court, international criminal court, United Nations, anywhere else, and make it stick. It's just the most powerful country in the world, and we do whatever the fuck we want, excuse my language. And so that's really, it was both of them were criminal acts. But the Agent Blue was actually a criminal act, There was more to your question. I don't know that's one piece of it. What was the other?
Yeah. So the second piece of the question is just about the challenges that you and the organization that you're involved with and other NGO face during the entire journey of advocating, beside like lacking of resources. Is there any like barrier or block along the journey?
Well, our own incompetence, maybe. We worked hard at it, and we brought, I think, 7 or 8 delegations of Vietnamese and traveled the country with them, and really raised the consciousness in this country about Agent Orange, so that I don't think anybody in this country other than a couple of lackeys of the chemical companies, would ever say anything good about Agent Orange or say, "Oh, it doesn't matter." I mean, nobody in this country has that attitude, as far as I can tell. Um, some of the Viet Q, the Vietnamese Americans that came here early after the war, some of them called it for a very long time, called it, just a communist con. But I'm not hearing that anymore at all either. I mean, people recognize that, it caused problems, and it created what in this country would be Superfund sites. Oh, I didn't talk about that a little bit more, if I may. So the three hotspots are being dealt with, or have been dealt with, but the three big ones. But there's a bunch of others that were identified by Stellman, what's her first name? Dr. Stellman, a number of years ago, when she was sort of surveying where Agent Orange was sprayed. The Air Force had the ranch hand program, but the Army had what they call the Army Chemical Corps. And have you heard about these guys? So it was a small group of units. I mean, I don't know how many, maybe a couple of battalions worth, a couple thousand guys. And their job was to go around the military bases and spray this stuff into the wire around the military bases so that the weeds wouldn't grow up and provide, cover for attackers. And so this stuff was sprayed religiously around most of the military bases, U.S. military bases and South Vietnamese military bases throughout the war. And even after the U.S. stopped spraying ranch hand, it was used by those remaining American units and the Vietnamese units, the ARVN units, to keep their wires clean, their concertina wire clean. And so there's a lot of these little hotspots where it's just the perimeter of the old base. And these are now that's all villages, or they've turned them back into fields and such. And so this stuff is still in the ground in a number of places around the country. Also, there were at least 3 catastrophic crashes of the C-130s full of Agent Orange. It just smashed into the ground and either shot down or had engine failure and smashed into the ground. And so that's a big chunk of it there. And it's out in the middle of somewhere and it's being logged or it's being farmed and so there's these smaller hotspots and we don't know how many. Stellman identified a total of 28. So there's 25 left, but they did a little bit of surveying and some of those, they did like half of them and they went out and poked a couple of holes and took some samples back and either did find some dioxin or didn't. It's not been properly done. And that still needs to be done. And the US needs to pay for it. Even though the potential for harm is much smaller, it can be really devastating in a small community. That if you've got a little village of 20 houses and 4 of those have disabled people, that has an effect on the economy and certainly makes life miserable for those families. So that still needs to be done, and I think it's important that we do no more harm. Um, but our focus really at this point, I mean, there's that focus, and the second focus is really providing some serious assistance to the people who were affected by Agent Orange. The problem we have is that people moved around at the end of the war. People moved into an area and maybe were exposed, or maybe they were exposed and then they moved out of the area, so they're living in Saigon now. So it's hard to know because you can't establish a direct causation. This person's ill, or this person had a really messed up kid because of their Agent Orange exposure. It's impossible to prove with any certainty. So what the U.S. has done is provide some assistance to the Vietnamese, handicapped Vietnamese, without regard to cause. And that's good. I mean, certainly handicapped people drive families into poverty no matter what. So it's a good thing to do, but it doesn't necessarily address the crime of Agent Orange. And so that has to be somehow finessed. Senator Leahy was able a few years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago now, to get the appropriations legislation to include the phrase um, with concentration on those areas where Agent Orange was sprayed. And so they designated 6 separate provinces in what was South Vietnam or in southern and central Vietnam, because those are where the most heavily sprayed areas were. Well, a whole bunch of the country was sprayed. And there's all the people who were on the Ho Chi Minh Trail who were in fighting in South who are now living in the North, and they have illnesses and birth defects, and they're not included. So there's a ways in which that's a real imperfect um, solution, and it's severely underfunded. They're not given nearly enough money to this issue. And so one of the things that I noticed in my trips back recently, or in the last 10 years, is that you've got these, as I mentioned, this two-room house, and in the back room is this 25, 28-year-old man who can't clean himself, can't talk. And mom and dad are in their 70s and 80s. What's going to happen to that kid when mom and dad can no longer? I mean, they've already suffered their entire lives through a war, and then with this child who turned into a man who can't be handled, and now they're ancient and tired, and I mean, what's going to happen to that? And so we're really trying to stress that the U.S. government needs to provide direct assistance to the Vietnamese government to build facilities for the long-term care of very disabled people. In addition, there's a lot of families that have 2, 3 kids that are really kind of very, they're really severely damaged, but they can kind of get around. And they need handrails. They need ramps for either wheelchairs or to ease in and out of the house. Almost all the Vietnamese houses in the countryside have 2 steps. You got to get up 2 steps. Well, that's really hard to do if you have very severe skeletal issues. You know, and handrails and ramps and those sorts of things, or for that matter, a leaking roof. I mean, you can do a lot with a little bit of money if it's honestly spent. I don't trust the AID to honestly spend any money. They mostly use all their money on themselves, or they give contracts to these beltway bandits, and who spend it on themselves. So you've got these do-gooders who are getting $130,000 a year going to Vietnam and doing a study. They don't need that. They need some real down to earth. Let's see what we can do to alleviate the suffering these people are having.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you, Paul. And then also, like, it's very interesting because so actually I were in Vietnam a few weeks ago, when I had an opportunity to interview like one Vietnamese soldier who is exactly in the same situation that you just say. They have like 2 kids, and then they're both like incapable of taking care of themselves, and then like both of the parents like in the 70s, 80s now having to take care of them, and then they were just like being really they just like keep concerning about like what would happen when they pass away, what would happen to the childrens and things like that. So yeah, that's why, like, what you say was just really 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 touching. Thank you so much for that. So I think Van has a next question. I think is on like the educational piece, and then is the piece about like the future generations and awareness. Van, if you want to ask this question.
Yes, so we've talked about the efforts of NGOs, international organizations, US and Vietnam governments in alleviating the impacts of Agent Orange. But there seems to be still a gap in, or like a lack of awareness amongst the young generation. Um, for example, when I talk to my American friends, surprisingly, not many of them are aware of Agent Orange. So, how do you think we can educate the younger generations about Agent Orange?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Well, I'm happy to run my mouth at any point about it, but that's a much bigger question. I'm in a lot of. I have a lot of younger friends, people my age too, who've gone to Vietnam as tourists, and you can travel the end of that to one end of that country to the other and have a great time and never see a bit of it. Agent Orange, unexploded ordnance, either one, even though those are really tremendously difficult problems in Vietnam still. And the Vietnamese, I mean, they really like, they have the tourist money, and it's a wonderful country and the people are fabulous. But if you're not looking and you don't know where to look, you're not going to see it. So I'm afraid I'm open to suggestion, but I don't really have a great idea. I mean, we've done what we can, and we're getting tired. I mean, I'm 76. I mean, I can't do this a lot longer. And we haven't brought any delegations here since before the pandemic. 2017, I think, was the last one that we did. And since then, two of our group have died, and we just don't have the energy to do that anymore. Certainly, one thing we are still doing is that I'm going to Vietnam next month, and we have a chapter of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 160, which is made up of expats, U.S. veterans who now live in Vietnam, and then people like me who are focused on Vietnam. So we've done 10 educational tours, and we're doing one more next month. And each person pays for the tour, and then they donate another $1,000 that we then allocate to various agencies and charities in Vietnam that we have witnessed. So we'll donate some to the Unexploded Ordnance, the Blind Center in Quang Tri that provides employment for people who've been blinded by either disease or accident or born without eyes, that sort of thing. And we've provided them with we built a shed for them so they can work out of the sun, but not in a hot building. We've provided them machinery. The blind centers, I think there's 3 of them in Quang Tri that makes incense, for burning at people's memorials. And they have these hand-run machines, and blind people can do that with some assistance from seeing folks. Prosthetics, the Quang Tri prosthetics thing. Hearts for Way, which buys farm animals for people up in Aloe Valley and those areas. So there are those kinds of things that we are very careful to make sure that these tours that go, and we have 20 people going in 2 weeks, really get to visit with Agent Orange victims, families, these poor families that are in the middle of nowhere, and these various other populations that need this kind of assistance. And it's a very important educational tool. And we've donated about $250,000, but that's not much. I mean, that's just a drip. But the educational value has been good. And a lot of people who have gone on these 10 tours wind up donating for subsequent tours. And that's very nice. But it's not much. I mean, it's not what's needed. What's needed is action in Congress. The U.S. needs to, pick up the brass, as they said, police the brass, and really, it's the cost of war, and nobody wants to pay the cost of war. That's both veterans like me who are disabled or veterans who are disabled. I'm not terribly disabled. And for the victims in those, and the former combatants, for that matter. They're not our enemies anymore. And for me, that's been a really, really healing thing, is to do this kind of work. I didn't want to go back to Vietnam, but I forced myself to after I got involved in the Agent Orange stuff. I really didn't want to see that country again, because I have ghosts running around in that country that I still haven't really confronted them very carefully, but I feel better that I'm able to do something to mitigate that damage that I participated in. I enabled. I supported for a while. By the time I left the war, I'm done with this. This is sick, you know. So
Yeah. I agree with you that you mentioned that no one really want to pay for the cost of a war, and it's really sad that there's a civil war going on in a war right now, and then envision like what it's going to look like in a year to come, right? So Paul, we have talked about quite a bit. We've talked about awareness, we talk about advocacy, we talk about the impact of Agent Orange, and then and especially like from your expertise and experience with like regulatory and legislatures and things like that. In 2022, the U.S. Consolidated Appropriation Act like exclusively include like the explicit language to require like the federal agency to support a person with disability called by Agent Orange. I think that is like the huge step in the recognitions of the impact of that. So I'm just wondering, so from like a person with decade of experiences advocating for victims and dedicated yourself to these issues, I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about like if there's one specific thing, just one thing in either society, policies, or anything like that that you would like to see, or any action that you would like to see in reality that can help the victim of Agent Orange. What would that be?
well, I think I've already talked about it. I mean, it's legislation with appropriations, with the money behind it. Um, some of my friends who agree with me think that we need to be talking about reparations. But the Vietnamese have never asked for reparations, and they're very clear not to use that word. The U.S. is not likely, at least in my lifetime, to sort of say, "Oh, our bad, we're sorry, we didn't really mean it," and I, that sort of, it's always on the basis of, well, your interests and our interests are now in much closer alignment, and so let's talk and let's do trade and let's spend a lot of money in each other's country, and that's kind of the way it goes with these people. It would be swell if the U.S. would say we were wrong. We've had many individuals. I mean, McNamara came out and said before he died, "We're wrong. We were wrong." But that's not the same as having the president of the United States saying it. It really isn't. And that would open some doors, perhaps. I mean, the U.S. is stepping up quite substantially with terms of um, aid for handicapped people. Not nearly enough, but the cleanup, that's significant, and I'm proud that we were able to contribute to that to some degree. But there's so much more needs to happen, and then we need to stop with these other stupid wars, of which there are. There's been the American people haven't really learned anything, I think, from we used to think, oh, that's going to, the United States not going to do anything like that after Vietnam. That was such a mess. And we all learned a lesson. We haven't learned jack, frankly. I mean, what we've learned is that let's make sure that other people do all the dying. You know, that's what we're doing. I mean, these these wars of just making sure that the Ukrainians do the dying for us. It ain't going to work out like that for very long, but that's the plan. But now I'm ranting. I'm sorry. I didn't answer your question very well.
We really appreciate the insights and all of the stories that you've shared. So, our project mainly through the website will be live in early December, and we will make sure to make it accessible to the public, especially targeting the youth. So, our last question, I think would be, is there anything that you want to highlight in our conversation that you want to know the public would be able to see?
You want a good soundbite. That's what you want, right? Yeah, I'm really proud of you guys I'm really proud of you to step up and take on these very serious issues. I think maybe it creates conflict in your families, maybe. No? or at least you know that in many Vietnamese American families, these are still real tough issues. And so I'm very impressed that you're. I mean, you have all the support of the family from your family and your community that you need, but I'm still very impressed when young people take up these issues. We're not leaving you with a very good situation, frankly, even though the situation between the United States and Vietnam is way better than it was 50 years ago. So, but in general, your generation has a lot of trouble, and we've left you with a mess. And I apologize. I tried. God knows I tried. So, but that's not the soundbite you wanted, was
it? Yes. So, I think that would conclude our conversation tonight. And now, do you have any last minute questions that you want to ask? Or should
well,
we?
is your website up and around? Up?
Yeah, so actually, yes, Paul is actually currently published, and then so technically anyone with the link can access that, and then we can just send you the link after our conversation today. But yeah, so we'll be updating those with the interview that we conducted with both Vietnamese soldier and people like you who advocate for the victims, thing like that. So and then yeah, so like one say like we anticipate that the official full versions of the website will be launched by the end, will be deployed by the end of this year.
Oh, so it's not actually up, but you have a link to the.
Actually, yes, it's already up. We do have a link. The interview section is still blank and put as update, but we do have some resources on there, like the book reading list. We have a playlist for people who want to, capture some emotions from Agent Orange. We have like the timeline of justice, where we just capture one of the timeline, and then yeah, we talk about like the project. We educate people on Agent Orange 101, where we educate people what Agent Orange is and kind of thing like that. So yeah, so the website is actually up. It's the only portion of that, what is the main portion, like the interview and the narrative one is not up yet because we are conducting the interview like with you right now. So I appreciate all of your honest thought and insight, like the name of this of the project, Unseen Scar, Agent or Narrative. We really want like some honest and very deep thought and very sincere opinions that people have, things like that, because I think that is the most honest way to approach the problems, thing like that. And then like you say, I think like you have mentioned a lot of time, there's no excuse for the war and thing like that, but we can decide what we move forward with, and then we can decide the next step that we want to do to remediate the impact of the war. So
yeah. Have you interviewed Susan Hammond?
Oh, yeah. So I reached out to her and she said that she would get back to me yesterday, but she hadn't. So
Hasn't. Okay.
yeah,
Well, good.
so
She's a very important person to talk to.
yes.
She has switched, well, not completely switched, but she's moved on from Vietnam, the damage done by the war in Vietnam, to the damage mostly in Laos, in southern Laos. And there the situation is still very dire, and she's done really pretty extraordinary research on that by going up into those areas and doing some pretty, some of the first real studies of how those communities in southern Laos are still in severe degradation because of the damage that was done to through the war.
That's awesome, because like actually the call of action that I have with Van is like we're gonna ask Paul who's the next person to talk with, and then you mentioned that. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And then
Yeah,
Paul, go ahead.
yeah, I think I just have one last question because Nam mentioned, briefly about the structure of the website, but I do want to ask for your recommendations. Like, is there anything you want to see on the website that hasn't been mentioned by Nam?
Well, I should probably take a look at the website, and I'm
Okay.
happy to get back to you. Have you talked to Charles Bailey by any chance?
I don't think I have his contact information yet. So,
He's an author, right? He
Well,
wrote.
well, that was the culmination of his much more than a decade's worth of work. that he and oh God, the Vietnamese guy who wrote the book with him was
Like
really
Nick
this.
Son, right?
Yeah. Son, something
Right.
like that. They did. Charles Bailey, when I mentioned the Ford Foundation, he was at the Ford Foundation doing their Agent Orange program for about 10 years. And, he and Leahy were I think, the two most effective uh, people on, getting normalization of the issue of Agent Orange, um, to the extent that we have it now. So I would certainly suggest you read his book, but you also should talk to him. He's just a wonderful guy and very effective. He was very, very effective during this period. He always told us, "No, don't bother with the legislation. You'll never get it passed." And he's right. We never did. But he had access to the Ford Foundation, millions and millions of dollars, and he used it well. So
Yeah, actually, it's great that you mentioned that because Mr. Bailey book From Enemies to Partners,
yeah,
Vietnam, U.S.
yeah.
and Agent Orange is actually one of the top recommended book
Oh
we
yeah,
have on our book list here.
yeah.
And again, like Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Since you mentioned Bien Hoa, I was actually just looking into a new piece that we gathered for our website as well. That there's a quote that I want to close our conversation with from Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont, that he say, for me, there's no excusing for the folly of that war or diminishing the immense destructions and suffering that is caused, but we can decide what we want the future to be, and the work we begin here, which is Bien Hoa, today is part of doing that. So,
Yeah.
so thank you so much for all of the work that you have done, and thank you for encouraging like younger generation like us to take part into this journey of tackling this important issue. So thank you very much, Paul, for your
I
time.
am so pleased to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul.